vision or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Elaine, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the March 14th and 15th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And first up, DOJ suffers big blow in Powell probe. A federal judge threw out a pair of subpoenas the Justice Department issued to the Federal Reserve, handing a victory to the central bank and dealing a heavy blow to the U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro's criminal investigation into Chair Jerome Powell. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg ruled that the subpoenas were improper in a 27-page opinion unsealed Friday that highlighted President Trump's repeated public attacks on Powell. There is abundant evidence that the subpoena's dominant, if not sole, purpose is to harass and pressure Powell either to yield to the president or to resign and make way for a Fed chair who will, Boasberg, who was appointed by former President Barack Obama, wrote. The judge said that the government had produced essentially zero evidence that Powell had committed a crime. Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia and longtime ally of Trump, opened the probe to examine whether Powell gave false testimony to Congress last summer about the central bank's building renovation project. The move prompted an unprecedented public response from Powell, who, in a January 11th video statement, said the investigation was a pretext for Trump's continuing campaign to pressure the Fed to lower interest rates and end the independence of the central bank. Pirro vowed on Friday to appeal. She called Boasberg an activist judge and said the decision neutered the grand jury's ability to investigate crime. As a result, Jerome Powell today is now bathed in immunity, preventing my office from investigating the Federal Reserve, Pirro said. This is wrong and it is without legal authority. The Wall Street Journal had previously reported that the Fed was mounting a behind-closed-doors legal challenge to the subpoena. That battle took place out of public view because of secrecy rules that apply to criminal investigations pending before a grand jury. As part of his ruling, Boasberg also granted the central bank's request to unseal the proceedings related to the Fed's efforts to squash the subpoenas targeting its chair. Pirro's probe has threatened to hold up the confirmation of Kevin Warsh, the former Fed governor, whom Trump recently nominated to replace Powell after the investigation generated blowback from Republican senators. Republicans have been looking for an off-ramp to the standoff so that they can confirm Warsh and when Powell's term expires on May 15th. After meeting with Warsh on Tuesday, Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, repeated his view that he wouldn't advance any Fed nomination until the Justice Department probe was ended. He praised Warsh's qualifications, but said it is unfortunate that an ongoing investigation prevents me from voting for Kevin at this time. I am awaiting further clarification from the D.C. District Court regarding the criminal case. With all Democrats on the Senate Banking Committee taking the same stand, the 13-11 GOP majority isn't enough to push a nominee through without Tillis. Tillis has warned about steps that erode investors' expectations that the central bank will be given reasonable latitude to set interest rates as economic conditions warrant. On Friday, Tillis said the ruling confirmed just how weak and frivolous the criminal investigation was, calling it nothing more than a failed attack on Fed independence. He said appealing the ruling would only delay the confirmation of Warsh. We all know how this is going to end in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office should save further embarrassment and move on, Tillis said in a social media post. Trump, a Republican, has continued to badger the Fed to cut rates. He demanded on Thursday the central bank lower rates before its scheduled two-day policy meeting this coming week, where officials are widely expected to hold rates steady. Rate cuts in between scheduled meetings are very rare, and the Fed hasn't done so since March 2020, when the COVID shock was overwhelming financial markets. Expectations of a longer-lasting rise in energy prices prompted investors this week to dial back expectations around Fed cuts this year, and longer-term interest rates rose. Boasberg's decision marked the latest failed effort by Trump's favored prosecutors to target the president's perceived adversaries. Earlier attempts to prosecute former Federal Bureau of Investigation Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James both ended in rejection. Charges in both cases have been spearheaded by Lindsay Halligan, a former Trump personal lawyer installed by the president to run a U.S. Attorney's office in Virginia. A judge ruled Halligan was unlawfully appointed. Prosecutors then tried and failed twice to bring charges anew against James, as grand juries declined to sign off on a fresh indictment. A grand jury also recently decided not to sign off on charges for several Democratic lawmakers who, in a November video, told military service members they could refuse to obey illegal orders. Regarding the Fed probe, Boasberg connected the origins of the investigation to Trump's years in public insults of Powell, who Trump named as chair in 2018. The judge subtly likened the dynamic behind Poirot's probe with a famous plea attributed to King Henry II of England regarding the Archbishop of Canterbury. In sum, the president spent years essentially asking if no one will rid him of this troublesome Fed chair, Boasberg wrote. The government's justifications for the probe are so thin and unsubstantiated that the court can only conclude that they are pretextual, he wrote. And also in front page news, U.S. sends more forces to the Gulf. The Pentagon is moving additional Marines and warships to the Middle East as Iran steps up its attacks on the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. prepares to escort tankers through the waterway. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has approved a request from U.S. Central Command, responsible for U.S. forces in the Middle East, for an element of an amphibious-ready group and attached Marine Expeditionary Unit to head to the region, according to U.S. officials. 2 ships from the Japan-based USS Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit are now headed for the Middle East, one of the officials said. Marines are already in the Middle East supporting the Iran operation, and several more flights of Marines have moved into the theater in recent days, according to flight tracking data and U.S. officials. The move comes as Iran's attacks on the strait have paralyzed traffic through strategic waterways since the start of the war, disrupting the global economy, driving up gasoline prices, and posing a major military and political challenge for President Trump. The U.S. said it would release 172 million barrels of oil from the strategic petroleum reserve, a rare emergency measure aimed at bringing down crude prices. A Pentagon spokesperson declined to comment. One of the officials said the additional sets would initially be involved in strike operations in Iran. The USS Tripoli is equipped with F-35B jump jet fighters. An amphibious-ready group is a fast response unit used to conduct sea-based assaults, humanitarian aid missions, and special operations. The group's embarked Marine Expeditionary Unit includes more than 2,000 Marines. In addition to the Marine unit, the Pentagon is also weighing CENTCOM's request for 2 additional destroyers to help escort commercial ships through the strait, one of the officials said. Sending the USS Tripoli from Japan to the Middle East further decreases the U.S. forces deployed to the Pacific. Trump, a Republican, has also redirected the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln from the South China Sea for the Iran operation. Even with additional warships, U.S. forces won't begin escorting vessels until the threat from Iran is reduced, the official said. That could take up to a month or more, even as U.S. military strikes continue to target Tehran's arsenal of missiles and drones. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a brand of Iran's armed forces, branch of Iran's armed forces, struck 3 cargo ships attempting to transit the waterway on Wednesday, as Iran's new hardline supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, vowed Thursday to continue blocking the strait. The U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said that while the U.S. wasn't ready to escort oil tankers through the strait quite yet, he hoped it would happen in the next month. All of our military assets right now are focused on destroying Iran's offensive capabilities and the manufacturing industry that supplies their offensive capabilities, he told Fox News. We don't want this to be a brush-off for a year or two. We want to permanently destroy their ability to produce missiles, to build drones, and to have a nuclear program. Hegseth said Friday that the Pentagon wanted to reopen the strait sequentially in a way that makes the most sense for what we want to achieve and ensure that we're sending the right signals to the world when we do so. Reopening the strait is a difficult task because Iran has many ways to threaten ships trying to pass through using fast attack watercraft, ballistic missiles, drones, sea mines, and coastal-based cruise missiles. In addition to the U.S. Navy ships, coalition warships could aid the escort mission, one of the officials said. Mark Montgomery, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral, estimated it could take 3 to 4 weeks from the start of Iran's retaliatory attacks on March 1st to reduce the risk of transiting the strait to manageable levels. If escort operations begin prematurely and American ships get hit, the political and operational cost of restarting is dramatically higher, he warned. Before the strikes on Iran began February 28th, the U.S. already had 12 warships in CENTCOM and an additional 7 in the eastern Mediterranean, according to a Navy official. If the request for additional ships is approved, senior Navy leadership and the Pentagon will decide which ships to reroute to the Middle East. Those vessels could move from any other military theater, including the Pacific and the Caribbean. In addition to reducing the threat, the Defense Department will need to devise a plan to protect commercial vessels trying to transit the strait using destroyers, fighter aircraft equipped with precision-guided weapons, and armed helicopters, Montgomery said. Escorting ships through the strait will be an intensive task that will require full-time work from the ships involved, said retired Vice Admiral John Miller, a former commander of naval forces in the Middle East. While we likely have enough ships in the area to start escorting, they would need to be retasked for the purpose from what they are doing now, including knocking down Iranian missiles and drones headed toward land, Miller said. He also said he expected the Iranian regime to aggressively target any escort operations because stopping or slowing down commerce is the best card it has left. But Montgomery warned that shutting down the strait posed a risk to Iran's economy as well. This is like a scorpion riding the frog's back. When they sting, one of the biggest economies hurt by shutting down the strait will be the Iranian economy, he said. At some point, they'll be accountable for their own actions. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And next, Trump's AI fight affects every company. In the past year, President Trump has demanded Intel hand over 10% of its equity, that NVIDIA share its China chip revenue with Treasury, and Amazon scrap plans to show tariffs to some customers. In all cases, the companies quietly complied. But when his Defense Department demanded unrestricted access to Anthropic's artificial intelligence, the company loudly said no. For businesses in the Trump era, it was an unprecedented act of defiance, and it drew an unprecedented response. The administration designated the company as a supply chain risk. The two are now going to court, and the outcome matters to every American business. A win for the government would effectively empower the president to cripple any company over political differences. The designation bars Anthropic's models being used in military contracts, and depending on how broadly it is interpreted, the designation could threaten the company's growth or even its survival. Anthropic is at the bleeding edge of AI, and its diminishment would set back U.S. leadership in an industry critical to economic and strategic dominance. That Trump is prepared to take that risk sets this apart from other forays into state capitalism, where the goal has usually been economic, invest in the U.S., or financial, hand over the money. Now, the goal is political obedience. It is a sort of treatment companies expect in Russia or China, not the U.S. The case reverberates well beyond this one company. Every business that sells to the federal government must weigh the risk of being sanctioned should it break with the White House. Some might elect not to work with the Pentagon at all, depriving the U.S. military of the best technology Silicon Valley has. The case also threatens a competitive advantage for the U.S. tech abroad, political neutrality. American companies can tell clients that, unlike their Chinese competitors, they don't follow orders from the ruling party. We are pushing foreigners to this world where they cannot trust American AI products for the same reason they can't trust Chinese stuff, said Dean Ball, a former AI advisor to Trump. The dispute began over philosophical differences. Co-founder Dario Amodei has made safety and social responsibility central to Anthropic's approach to AI. Usage restrictions governing its contract with the Pentagon stipulate that its AI cannot be used for domestic mass surveillance or full autonomous weapons. The Pentagon, which objects to outside limits on what its troops can do, wants unrestricted access for all lawful purposes. Both positions are legitimate, and which perhaps makes them irreconcilable, which is okay. One of the capitalism's many virtues is that you can choose with whom to do business based not just on product or price, but on values. Bud Light, too woke? Drink Miller Lite. Fox News, too conservative? Watch MS Now. If Anthropic was too inflexible, the Pentagon could have simply terminated the contract. But Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went further, declaring on X that no contractor, supplier, or partner that does business with the United States military may conduct any commercial activity with Anthropic. That would easily prove fatal. Ball, who helped develop Trump's AI strategy last year, called it corporate murder in a Substack post. The message sent to every investor and corporation in America: do business on our terms or we will end your business. The formal designation the department sent Anthropic last week was narrower than Hegseth's post, barring contractors from using Anthropic on defense contracts, but not, it appears, other business. From the very beginning, this has been about one fundamental principle: the military being able to use technology for all lawful purposes, said a senior Defense Department official. The military will not allow a vendor to insert itself into the chain of command by restricting the lawful use of a critical capability and put our warfighters at risk. Still, there are reasons to suspect the Pentagon is singling out Anthropic. It promptly reached a contract with OpenAI, which claims it, too, restricts the use of its models for domestic mass surveillance and autonomous weapons. Trump labeled Anthropic left-wing nut jobs, a reference to Amodei's past criticism of Trump and links to Democrats. The designations is based on a provision in a 2010 law aimed at foreign adversaries seeking to sabotage, maliciously introduce unwanted function, or otherwise subvert American military systems. The provision has never been used on a domestic company. Its use against Anthropic is ironic because it has been harsher toward China than many in Silicon Valley, barring access to chatbot Claude from anyone in China. The Pentagon also invoked a related 2018 law that was used last year against a small Swiss-based company. The idea of these statutes was always that if you have a Huawei router in the Pentagon's supply chain, China can use that for espionage, said Peter Harrell, who advised President Joe Biden on supply chain security. Trump and Hegseth are using the laws to pressure a company into doing what they want, Harrell said. In their version of the free market, you have to sell on the terms and conditions the government wants, or it will put you out of business. Writing for Lawfare blog, Michael Andres and Alan Rosenstein predict Hegseth will lose in court because he exceeded the law, didn't meet the required findings, and doomed his case with his public statements. But by dragging the case out, the Trump administration could inflict lasting damage. While Anthropic is still signing up customers, it said in its court filing that the supply chain risk designation could follow Anthropic into every future procurement relationship with federal, state, and local governments and contractors, imposing significant financial and reputational costs. To date, big companies have avoided taking on Trump when their economic interests are at stake. Significantly, Microsoft has asked the courts to temporarily block the Anthropic designation, which, it said, saddles suppliers with vague and ill-defined directions and the fear of being designated supply chain risk in response to contract disputes. 3 tech trade groups in a letter asked Trump to reconsider. As for all of the companies that have remained silent, they are in this fight as well, whether they realize it or not. This article is called Under 40, You Should Be Getting Cholesterol Screening. Adults should be screened and treated for high cholesterol starting at age 30, if not sooner, according to new clinical guidelines, lowering the age by at least a decade as heart attacks are becoming more common in younger people. The goal is to shift to a more proactive approach to head off problems in earlier years rather than starting lifestyle changes and treatment in middle age when a patient might have damage to their arteries, said Dr. Roger Blumenthal, chair of the Committee of Cardiologists that wrote new guidelines. Growing research shows how much damage can be done when levels of LDL, or quote bad cholesterol, stay high in the blood for years. Meanwhile, more medicines have become available to lower cholesterol, along with screening tests and a new online tool that allows people 30 and older to calculate their risk of cardiovascular disease. The guidelines, published Friday in 2 leading cardiology journals, were issued by 11 medical associations, including the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association. These organizations set standards for medical professionals. About 25% of U.S. adults and 20% of adolescents have high LDL cholesterol. For adults especially, that increased their risk of heart attacks and strokes because it causes plaque-forming particles to build up in their arteries, hardening and narrowing them. Doctors are being urged to counsel children and adolescents on diet and exercise, avoiding tobacco and other healthy lifestyle habits. More young people are being diagnosed with diabetes and other conditions that put them at higher risk of cardiovascular events. The new guidelines offer several ways doctors can determine whether a person's at risk. Everyone should get a blood test once to measure their levels of lipoprotein, another type of bad cholesterol linked to heart disease. Researchers say LPA, which is genetic, significantly increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, and a test can identify risk for people who are otherwise healthy. Testing for another protein, alipoprotein B, can also be performed for those with high triglycerides, diabetes, or other conditions, the guidelines say. Research suggests it is better prediction of heart disease risk than LDL cholesterol. Men aged 40 and older and women aged 45 and older with a borderline risk of heart attack or stroke can also get a coronary artery calcium scan to check for plaque buildup in arterial walls. Children should be screened for cholesterol and other lipids once between ages 9 and 11. Backing an existing recommendation by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Young adults should be screened beginning at age 19 every 5 years after that. People should be screened for their risk of cardiovascular disease starting at age 30 using an AHA online calculator called Prevent that measures risk based on a person's cholesterol, blood pressure, and other indicators. And in other U.S. news, Pritzker's financial backing angers allies. Illinois governor has given at least $5 million in the U.S. Senate primary. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's deep financial involvement in his state's U.S. Senate primary on Tuesday has angered potential allies for his possible 2028 presidential bid. The billionaire is helping finance a multi-million-dollar barrage of ads to boost Juliana Stratton, his lieutenant governor, in a race that is also testing Pritzker's political clout in a state where he has leveraged his wealth to dominate the Democratic Party. The contest has turned sharply negative in its closing weeks while revealing divisions within the party over how progressive the Democratic brand should be. It has also become a debate about the influence of outside money. Pritzker's involvement has especially angered the Congressional Black Caucus, an influential party group backing one of its own, Representative Robin Kelly, a Democrat from Illinois. Both Stratton and Kelly are black. His behavior in this race won't soon be forgotten by any of us, Representative Yvette Clarke, Democrat from New York. The CBC's leader said in a statement, also critical of the governor for trying to tip the scales in a primary. Black voter support is critical in Democratic presidential primaries. Clarke declined an interview while Pritzker recently told reporters he has a proven record of supporting non-white candidates. I would like a black woman to represent us in the United States Senate. I just want the best person. She happens to be a black woman, he said. I stand with communities of color across the state and with candidates who are running for public office. The re-election campaign for Pritzker, unopposed in the primary, declined to comment further. A Stratton loss would be an embarrassment for Pritzker as he works to raise his national profile, and he could face an even angrier CBC if both Kelly and Stratton lose to Representative Raja Krishnamurti, Democrat from Illinois, the primary's fundraising frontrunner. Nonpartisan polling on the Senate primary has been minimal, but surveys conducted by Democratic sponsors have shown the order of candidates in recent months to be Krishnamurti, followed by Stratton, and then Kelly. I was disappointed with a statement from the CBC, especially when you think about the work Governor Pritzker and I have done to uplift every community in our state, Stratton said in an interview. I'm the only black candidate that has a path to beating Congressman Krishnamurti and the only opportunity in a nation to elect a black woman senator in the 2026 election. Pritzker, an heir to the Hyatt Hotel's fortune, is the biggest donor to a political action committee promoting Stratton and criticizing Krishnamurti. The governor has given at least $5 million to Illinois Future PAC, disclosure filings show. His cousin, Jennifer Pritzker, has contributed $1,050,000. With an estimated net worth of $3.9 billion, Pritzker spent more than $300 million to self-fund his first two gubernatorial campaigns and is a top Democratic donor nationally. Illinois last had a Republican senator in January 2017, and the primary winner is likely to fill the seat of retiring Democratic Senator Dick Durbin. Ads run by Illinois Future PAC have prominently featured Pritzker. The group spent $11.9 million on advertising through Wednesday, significantly more than the $864,000 spent by Stratton's own campaign, Ad Impact data shows. With $27.9 million in ad spending, Krishnamurthi's campaign has dominated the state's screens and airwaves. Kelly has spent just $1 million on advertising. A pro-cryptocurrency group called Fairshake has given Krishnamurti a late boost. It has spent $6.5 million on ads, all critical of Stratton. Despite Pritzker's significant involvement, Krishnamurti has largely avoided any criticism of him and instead stressed that they have a good working relationship. In an interview, Krishnamurti said Stratton's complaints about spending by outside groups in the race are hypocritical since she's benefited from them as well. I have over 90,000 individual donors, and that lends me a certain amount of independence, he said. Pritzker elevated Stratton to be his running mate in 2017 when she was just 7 months into her first term as a state representative. He faced a crowded primary in his first bid for governor, and her selection was meant to boost him with women and black voters. Stratton has stressed her progressive leanings. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, a progressive hero, is set to headline a rally for her on Friday. The lieutenant governor has called for the abolishment of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency in the wake of fatal shootings by immigration authorities. Krishnamurthy has called for a more nuanced elimination of Trump's ICE. Stratton has also said that $7.25 $7.25 federal minimum wages should be raised to $25 an hour. Krishnamurthy says that would hurt youth employment and small businesses, and said that $17 an hour is more politically realistic for congressional approval. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the U.S. economy unexpectedly stalls. The UK economy unexpectedly stalls. The UK economy stalled unexpectedly in January with a sustained return to modest growth, likely to be hindered further by the rise in energy prices and uncertainty that has accompanied the conflict in the Middle East. Gross domestic product showed no growth in the month, compared with a 0.1% rise in December, the Office of National Statistics said Friday. This missed a consensus of economics polled by the Wall Street Journal, who expected a rise of 0.2%. The UK has struggled to build momentum in recent years, with an increase in energy prices after the U.S. and Israel conflict with Iran now likely to act as a further headwind to growth. Zero growth in January highlights just how little momentum the economy had coming into the energy crisis, Thomas Pugh, chief economist at RSM UK, said. The government's budget watchdog earlier this month lowered its growth forecast for this year to 1.1% from 1.4%, which would mark a slowdown from a weak 2025. Production output slipped on month in January, while services stagnated. Households forced to pay higher energy bills will have less to spend on other goods and services, while the uncertainty created by President Trump's decision to attack Iran will likely prompt those who can save to save more, while businesses will hold back on hiring and investment decisions. The result could be a severe hit to demand, according to Thomas Weidlach, the chief European macroeconomist at T. Rowe Price. Therefore, the current oil price shock will most likely not just lead to inflation, but also push the UK economy into recession, he said. Paul Dales, an economist at Capital Economics, estimates the economy could grow by as little as 0.1% this year if the conflict and the rise in energy prices is prolonged. This leaves the Bank of England with another stagflationary dilemma, he said. A sharp slowdown would also be a blow to the Labour government, which pledged to revive the stagnant economy when it took office in mid-2024, but has struggled to deliver. The rise in tariffs announced by Trump last year was one headwind, as was an increase in employment taxes intended to contain government borrowing. Toward the end of last year and the early months of this year, those tax rises have helped the government reduce its borrowing, but significantly slower growth would weaken tax revenues, while the jump in government bond yields after the Iran conflict will likely raise its interest bill. The hit to growth and the government's borrowing costs could be even greater if the BOE decides to raise borrowing costs to tame the inflation surge. Before the Iran war, the central bank had been widely expected to cut rates at its policymakers' meeting on Thursday, with its key rate at 3.75% seen as restrictive amid slowing growth and rising unemployment. The BOE has yet to steer inflation back to its 2% target after a surge in food and energy prices in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. And in U.S. Watch, New York, a trooper convicted in child's death. A former New York State trooper accused of ramming his vehicle into an SUV during a high-speed chase leading to the death of an 11-year-old girl was convicted of manslaughter on Friday at his second trial. Prosecutors say Christopher Baldner, 47, rammed the SUV on the New York State Thruway, causing it to flip. 11-year-old Monica Goods, who was in the SUV, was killed in the 2020 crash. Baldner's attorney said the accident occurred after the SUV cut the trooper off as he pulled alongside in the pursuit. The retired trooper who has remained free on bail faces a maximum of 5 to 15 years in prison when he is sentenced on June 2nd. A jury acquitted Baldner of murder and reckless endangerment charges in November, but they deadlocked on a second-degree manslaughter charge. Judge Brian Rounds declared a mistrial, and a second trial on the lone remaining charge began last month. Charles W. Murphy, president of the Police Benevolent Association of the New York State Troopers, said the union was deeply disappointed in the verdict. And in Washington, Bessent to meet China Vice Premier. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will meet with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng on Sunday and Monday in Paris for a new round of trade talks, the Treasury Department said, paving the way for President Donald Trump's state visit to Beijing starting March 31st. The talks between he and Bessent are seen as preparatory work for the state visit that Beijing has not confirmed. The White House has said that Trump will meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. It is believed that the visit aims to keep relations stable between the two economies. Thanks to the bonds of mutual respect between President Trump and President Xi, the trade and economic dialogue between the United States and China is moving forward, Bessent said in a statement. Under the guidance of President Trump, our team will continue to deliver results that put America's farmers, workers, and businesses first. Bessent and he have led trade negotiations between the countries since last year, having met in Geneva, London, Stockholm, Madrid, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And in weather, extreme storms to cover the country. 2 storm systems this weekend are expected to hit the country's northern tier and Great Lakes, dumping as much as 4 feet of snow, meteorologists said on Friday, predicting a week of unusual weather across the country. Forecasters said south of the area of Michigan, where the snow will hit, there is a potential for an ice storm. Later next week, forecasters expect a heat dome to form over the southwest with triple-digit temperatures. An area from Kansas through Oklahoma into Texas is forecast to get high winds in the 60 miles per hour range. Hawaii is getting an atmospheric river with such persistent heavy rain that flood risks will loom. Alaska is expected to be about 30 degrees colder than usual. Weather whiplash has hit much of the east. On Wednesday, Washington, D.C. said temperatures reached 86 degrees. A day later, snow hit the area. All of the country, even if you're not seeing extremes, are going to see generally changes from cold to warm or warm to cold to warm, said meteorologist Mark Chenard of the National Weather Service's Weather Prediction Center. And in sports, the economists join the madness. The University of Chicago is chasing its first ever NCAA championship men's basketball. The University of Chicago has long been one of the country's great academic incubators, most famously around economics. Big brains associated with the school have collected the 101 Nobel Prizes, a tally that ranks behind only those nerdbots at Harvard and Berkeley. You've got to be wicked smart to get into Chicago. If I had applied, the admissions board would have never stopped laughing. As far as athletics, the University of Chicago's signature moment may be abolishing football, which it did in 1939, despite having Big Ten program once coached by gridiron savant Amos Alonzo Stagg, the godfather of innovations like the huddle and the Statue of Liberty play. Then President Robert Maynard Hutchins worried college football was spinning out of control, overshadowing academic priorities. Yikes. Thank goodness college football is nothing like that today. Stagfield, meanwhile, would go on to become the site of the world's first nuclear reactor. As for football, it was reinstalled at Chicago in 1969 and now competes in the Division III level. Chicago has enjoyed success in multiple sports, recently winning Division II national championship in men's soccer, men's and women's tennis, and numerous individual titles in track and field. But it's been a while since the Maroons from the South Side have had a showy run like the one now happening in men's basketball. A team largely composed of economic majors who know their way around Milton Friedman and Gary Becker. Chicago, 23-4, is a D3 powerhouse currently in the D3 Sweet 16 and chasing its first ever NCAA national title. Nobody's ever going to confuse this with Alabama football, says head coach Mike McGrath. But if you think about the student-athlete model, I think we show you can do both of those things very, very well. McGrath has been with the Maroons program for more than 3 decades, starting as a volunteer assistant before becoming head coach in 2000. He's had plenty of good teams, but the current edition may be the most stacked Chicago's ever had, a combination of returning upperclassmen and graduate transfers who soared to number 1 in February and are currently ranked 6th in the country. Chicago's 17th ranked women's team is also in its Sweet 16. Not bad for a bunch of economists, huh? Of course, coaching analytically minded players familiar with the diminishing marginal returns presents hurdles, McGrath says. Obviously, the kids are really smart, he says, but you can't BS them. They're going to challenge everything that you tell them. You have to be prepared for that, and there's a need to understand the why behind things. Chicago senior Eamon Kenna chuckles when I mention McGrath's description. Obviously, coach might get frustrated with that sometimes, he says, but yeah, I think a lot of us look at the world a little bit differently. It doesn't hurt that basketball itself has undergone an analytical revolution in which offensive and defensive efficiency is critical. Like a lot of teams, Chicago focuses on moving the ball and shooting three-pointers. Meanwhile, a friend of the program, Chicago professor John List, is working with students on an analysis of player positioning. Where's the most efficient place to get a player the ball in a scoring position, List explains. List has been impressed by the Chicago basketball players in his economic classes. This is a serious place, he says. I think about University of Chicago economics as work hard, play hard type of idea, and this is exactly what mentality the players are bringing in. It isn't easy, like the NBA player who has a humbling welcome to the NBA moment. Chicago students have a welcome to the University of Chicago moment. Kenna says his was having to read 200 pages of sociologist Emily Durkheim before setting a foot in his first class. A little bit daunting, he says. Teammate Joe Barry recalls cramming for finals on a travel weekend, not getting home until 1 a.m. and having to wake up for an exam at 6 a.m. That was definitely my welcome to Chicago moment, he says. The payoff comes later, says basketball alum Jake Fenlon. Now in private equity, Fenlon tells me the grind on and off the court prepared him well for life after graduation. University of Chicago's really rigorous, said Fenlon, a former three-point shooting ace. But I think the basketball stuff is really what differentiates the experience. Knowing how to work in a team, how to build relationships, being able to handle constructive feedback when you screw up. Not surprisingly, this Maroons season has the basketball alums buzzing. Fenlon says Chicago faces Gustavus Adolphus, itself the host of the annual Nobel Conference, on Saturday with a shot to make Elite Eight. An unprecedented trip to the D3 Final Four looms. If it happens, Fenlon hopes to be there. Economists' road trip? It's been proposed in our group chat, he says. I wouldn't be surprised. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And Amazon taps startups' hyper-fast chips in business and finance. Amazon Web Services plans to deploy processors designed by Cerebras inside its data centers, the latest vote of confidence in the startups, which specializes in chips that power artificial intelligence models. Under the multi-year partnership, which the companies announced Friday, AWS will use Cerebras chips called the Wafer Scale Engine to help power so-called interface functions, which allow AI models to respond to user queries. The companies declined to disclose the financial terms of the agreement. The deal underscores a major shift in the market for computing power. The AI industry is increasingly shifting away from model training and toward inference. Companies that design AI tools and agents are realizing that graphics processing units, or GPUs, while fast and powerful for training, aren't ideal for inference workloads that require more speed. Many of them are seeking to diversify supplier bases as they rapidly expand and gain millions of new users for their tools. AWS, the largest cloud service provider, has relied heavily on chips designed by its in-house semiconductor business known as Annapurna Labs to power its data centers. These chips, known as Trainium, are roughly the equivalent to the GPUs made by NVIDIA, Advanced Micro Devices, and other large chip firms. In January, ChatGPT maker OpenAI signed a pact worth more than $10 billion to use Cerebras chips to power its popular chatbot, the Wall Street Journal reported. The deal gave renewed prominence to Cerebras, a startup backed by a host of blue-chip financial firms, including Fidelity Management, Atratus Management, Benchmark, Tiger Global, and Coatue, but which had previously struggled at times to raise money. A firm had filed for an initial public offering in September 2024, but withdrew its filing about a year later. In February, Cerebras said it had raised $1 billion in new funding round, bringing its total fundraising to $2.6 billion and evaluation to approximately $23 billion. OpenAI is seeking to deploy up to 750 megawatts of computing power using Cerebras' chips. AWS plans to combine Cerebras chips with its own Trainium chips in its data centers to improve its solutions for inference computing. Cerebras bills its chips as hyper-fast inference solution and says it can process the complicated tasks known as decode, or the phase of inference computing in which the AI model spits out a response to a user query, up to 25 times faster than NVIDIA's GPUs. More people are using AI, using it more often, and using it to solve harder problems, said Cerebras chief executive Andrew Feldman in an interview. This puts the Cerebras Trainium solution in the largest cloud. It gives us access to a ton of customers. The deal represents a fresh challenge to NVIDIA, which has seen mounting competition from designers of custom processors and which faces pressure to offer customers new products that are capable of running AI models faster and at a lower cost. In December, NVIDIA aligned a $20 billion licensing deal with a chip startup, Groq, and next week plans to unveil a new processing system tailored for inference using Groq's technology. AWS, a major unit of Amazon.com, and Cerebras said that the partnership would offer some of the fastest inference computing available and would be priced at a premium service. Our job is to push the speed and lower the price, said Nafea Bashara, co-founder of Annapurna Labs and a vice president and distinguished engineer at AWS. The cloud computing firm will still offer slower computing services using just its tranium processors at a lower price point as well. And in markets and finance, war cancels crypto fans Woodstock in Dubai. The organizers of Dubai's flagship crypto conference are scrapping this year's get-together due to the Iran war, another blow to the metropolis's status as a safe haven. Token 2049, billed as the world's largest crypto event, was scheduled for late April. In recent years, it has become a sort of Woodstock for the crypto faithful, drawing tens of thousands of enthusiasts from around the globe. The two-day event at the Madinat Jumeirah Resort featured desert DJ raves, yacht parties, and fan meet and greets with the crypto's richest tycoons, all set in a city that made the sector a core part of its plan to become a new financial center. This year, the roster of speakers included Eric Trump, Polymarket founder Shane Coplan, Telegram chief executive Pavel Durov, and Binance co-CEO Richard Tang. Token 2049 organizers said the event was postponed until April next year, citing the uncertainty in its region and its effects on safety there and on international travel. We remain confident in the city and its continued leadership as a global center for innovation and digital assets. The organizer said in a statement, Token 2049 will host a separate conference in Singapore in October. Worried ticket holders had started peppering the organizers with questions in the event's Telegram group as Iranian missiles and drones fell on Dubai. The attacks shut down the airport, struck the iconic Burj Al Arab hotel, and killed several people across the United Arab Emirates. The Telegram group's administrator insisted on Sunday that Token 2049 remains scheduled as planned and preparations continue in full. What are you talking about? Iran is still hitting the Dubai airport, responded one user. And in World Watch, Poland, Tusk plans to use EU defense loans. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk vowed Friday to find ways to tap into 43.7 billion euros, $50.1 billion, in defense loans from the European Union, despite a veto by the country's president against a law enabling access to the funds. Poland was to be the largest beneficiary of the EU's Security Action for Europe initiative, or SAFE, which is designed to boost Europe's defense readiness. But President Karol Nawrocki, who has positioned himself as a Tusk opponent, said he is vetoing the legislation allowing Poland to access the EU defense loans. Poland is in shock, Tusk said Friday. People are wondering if this is treason, the work of lobbyists, or a lack of common sense. And in South Africa, soldiers dismantle illegal gold mining. South African soldiers have dismantled illegal gold mining operations in a community near Johannesburg, forcing illegal miners to flee. Police and the army recovered various tools used by illegal miners, including generators and drill machines. Makeshift trenches with food supplies and utensils belonging to the miners were also dismantled, with clothing items left behind after the miners fled the site, about 25 miles to the west of Johannesburg. The operations were part of a rare move by the government to deploy soldiers in some of the country's most crime-ridden areas, including in the Western Cape province that includes the city of Cape Town and the economic hub province, Gauteng. And in Sweden, a ship accused of using a false flag. Swedish authorities are investigating a tanker that was allegedly sailing under a false flag in the Baltic Sea. The Swedish Coast Guard boarded the Sea Owl 1 Thursday off the coast of Trelleborg. The tanker was sailing under the flag of the Comoros Islands off East Africa, though the Coast Guard says investigators believe that it wasn't its correct flag. The tanker is on the EU sanctions list and had been traveling from Brazil to Russia, the Coast Guard said Friday. Investigators will search the ship and conduct interviews to determine the vessel's seaworthiness. The ship is the second vessel sailing in Swedish territorial waters. The Coast Guard is investigating. And in France, artifact returned to the Ivory Coast. France returned a sacred drum looted during the colonial period to Ivory Coast on Friday as part of a nearly decade-old effort by the French government to return cultural artifacts to African nations. It was the first such return by France to Ivory Coast. The Djiawake, pardon my pronunciation, a massive carved wooden drum once used by the Achin people of the Abidjan region to communicate between villages, was looted by French colonial authorities in 1916 and is among at least 140 looted artifacts Ivory Coast has asked France to return. The drum measures 11.5 feet long and weighs 950 pounds. Historians say it played a key role in warning villages about forced labor recruitment organized by colonial authorities. And finally, FedEx market cap overtakes rival UPS. All hail the new king of packages. For the first time in history, FedEx eclipsed United Parcel Service this week in market capitalization, a sign of how much Wall Street is rewarding the delivery giant that can shrink the fastest to boost profits. FedEx shares have climbed nearly 40% in the past 2 years, while UPS shares have dropped by about the same amount. On Monday, FedEx was valued at $84.9 billion, about $44 million more than its rival, for the first time since FedEx was worth more than the UPS went public in 1999. UPS retook the top spot on Tuesday, but FedEx was on top again by Friday's closing bell. The longtime rivals have been slashing thousands of jobs and shrinking their operations after adding capacity to their networks during the pandemic. UPS shares have tumbled since the company signed a new contract with the Teamsters Union in 2023. For decades, Wall Street judged the companies on how big they could grow, focusing on metrics including parcel volume and revenue. During the pandemic, they expanded to keep up with the demand, but when e-commerce shipments eased, investors focused on their cost-cutting efforts. FedEx had $88 billion in revenue in its last fiscal year, just behind the $88.7 billion in revenue that UPS reported in the 2025 calendar year. But FedEx delivered fewer packages. Its average daily domestic parcel volume was 14 million compared with 20 million for UPS. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 14th, 15th issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Elaine. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,